back to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. Joining us today is David Taxer. He's an author of a book called Shadows of Eden, which we'll be discussing later today. He's a whistleblower, an OSINT analyst, a pen tester, and a former C-suite executive based in Houston, Texas. And he's here with us to discuss both his book and his background and the intersection of OSINT, security, politics, populism, cults, and all these wonderful things we see in the news, but he has experienced in real life. David, welcome to the Washington Outsider Report. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we delve into your latest development, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into all the interesting things you've been doing, and what they all mean to the general public?
Sure. I'm a native Oregonian that grew up in Oregon. I've experienced the culture all of my life. I've been active in politics most of my life as well. I worked with the DeFazio campaign as a campaign consultant. Before that, MoveOn.org, campaigning for Obama. Got a degree in political science at the University of Oregon. And then after that, I sort of fell into the insurance industry. It was right after the Affordable Care Act was passed, and I wound up getting into the health insurance industry as a broker. Within a year, I had started my own brokerage and built a web presence that our company was ran a little bit differently. We directly marketed. We didn't participate in the schemes that other brokerages are doing, where they buy leads and all that nonsense. We went out of our way to be different. And I made the mistake of taking on a business partner. And that individual was embezzling for me the entire time. I learned that after the fact. It came to my attention that he had been hoarding Social Security numbers, doing all kinds of things that are unethical and illegal in the industry. I became aware that he was stealing identities and likely doing this in mass. And when I reported it to the police, they attempted to suppress it, and then continued to harass me, trumped up more charges against me, and sent me packing. Frankly, they nearly killed me.
Well, let's start from the beginning. You are reporting a run-of-the-mill white-collar crime, of which there are, many instances, people being taken down daily, corporate fraud, embezzlement, identity theft. Everyone agrees that all those things are bad. There's no controversy about those items. No one thinks that, this is somehow, a byproduct of some sort of social injustice. All these things come from greed, or essentially someone, or exceptionally poor judgment, or some combination of both. So why would the police be opposed to pursuing the case?
Well, it took a while to get to the bottom of that. I've come to the conclusion that the specific officers involved either were aware of an ongoing investigation, I was the last one to figure it out, or they were benefiting from this, as the crimes look like money laundering, and they look like a large money laundering operation that was ran through Globe Life. An article came out on April 11th, which described the massive frauds at Globe Life and stated that 60% of the premiums submitted to them were fraudulent in the form of identity theft and done for the purposes of agent commission fraud. As my investigation moved beyond just myself and trying to understand the embezzlement aspect of it against me, I became aware of bragging on social media of abnormal income coming from Globe Life specifically, about 2 years before that article was disclosed. And from that point on, I was off to the races with looking into that. And I was correct. I'm definitely correct about that. It hasn't been dealt with yet, to my knowledge, but I can't imagine that isn't coming. And that's why I finally went ahead and published this, because at this point it's public knowledge. Um, I gave the FBI 2 years to take care of this. Someone else reported it, and I decided it was finally time to tell my story.
So, are you saying that your partner who was involved in this, fraudulent scheme was not the only person involved in it? Was it some sort of a conspiracy?
Yes, I mean, this went straight, there were kickbacks involved with Globe Life in this criminal network. And the way the insurance works, industry works, it's organized like a multi-level marketing organization. So there's uplines and downlines, and so there's a long chain of people. I was able to identify some of them on, through Facebook, and just looking at people bragging about this and who they were connected to, and who they were thanking for getting them into this. Um, and some of those names I probably still have in my notes, and certainly the feds are aware at this point. But yes, it's a large group. It looks like Eastern European organized crime.
All right, so let's start from the very beginning to make the kind of to flesh out the story for the audience. How did you find your partner, and what made you decide to take him on to begin with?
We worked together at the old company. The old company was called VelaPoint, and they were a local Beaverton, Oregon insurance brokerage that is a combination of right time, I guess, and right something. And they exponentially grew from 10 agents to 10,000 within about 5 years. Were purchased by National General. The founder of that brokerage then took over National General and became the president of them, organized a buyout to Allstate for $4 billion, and then became a major executive with Allstate. And good for him if it was done legitimately. However, in the course of the investigation, I wound up looking at their web hosting, as they are buying up nearly every company in the health insurance industry they can get their hands on. And I was curious if my business partner had sold out my shares to them. I was curious if any of my websites were hosted with them. And lo and behold, all of the auto insurance applications that they had processed for the rolling 90 days were open to the internet, indexed on Google. You could search one of their websites, file type PDF, and looking at people's insurance applications. So yeah, I don't know if that's connected or not, or just a coincidence, but it's just an example of how easy it is to find these problems in the industry, at
That's
least
incredible.
at a minimum. Yeah.
Well, most of the people, whenever they hear insurance fraud or any funny busy with the insurance, they think of it all on the end user, individual end. Basically, people trying to scam insurance companies to make illicit money, fruit of the poison tree, and all that. But what you're talking about now is a mass scale industrial subterfuge that goes basically unnoticed because everyone is too busy looking at the little guys.
Correct. It's agent fraud is the term for it, and it's identity theft, commission frauds, and they're hand in hand. Synthetic identity theft. There's many types of agent fraud, but they generally stem around the misuse of consumer data, which is obtained via a sales process or other sources, and then used for malicious purposes. Frankly, the way this came to when I first started looking into this was when I logged into my bank account one day and noticed a PPP loan had been taken out in my name. I had not applied for one of those. So, this is when I was, this was before I was ran out of the company. In fact, this was about 3 months before I was ran out of the company. And is probably why I was ran out of the company. Christopher Wang was not, he was surprised that I became aware of the PPP loan. And that's what raised my suspicions to begin looking at a variety of other frauds. Um, Frankly, before I noticed the Globe Life bragging, the bragging about Globe Life on Facebook, what I had noticed was a photo that looked like a business meeting. And when I looked into the individuals in that business meeting, they all set up LLCs within a week of each other, and then they all took out PPP loans. And then a year later, they had all, because I had looked into this a little after the fact, and noticed this in historical posting. They had discontinued these LLCs about to the calendar year, and they were set up for the purposes of PPP loans, taking PPP loans. And I suspect they were using client social security numbers to pad the employment roster to justify taking the money.
Well, PPP fraud is something that's only beginning to really hit the news. We've heard about some of the massive schemes, but I have a feeling that there's a lot more to come.
It's the tip of the iceberg. Yes, that it is well known that there was a lot of fraud going on in that era. As I like to say, COVID brought all the fraudsters out of the woodwork. So
Absolutely.
did Donald Trump.
Between people being stuck and not being able to really get out and about and investigate and, really follow through on various issues, and regulators being busy with other things, is a perfect storm, um ideal for criminal activity. But you bring up something very interesting. And you bring up, uh,
Sometimes.
you actually bring up many interesting things. One of the
Thank you.
things that I think is very important to underscore is when we think of these sort of privacy violations, of data being sold out and passed along on the internet and so forth, making it ideal for hackers and all sorts of other, nefarious parties to take advantage of them. We think of big tech companies because their very business model is data based. It's all about selling data and making use of private data and commercializing data. We don't typically think of insurance companies, despite the fact that insurance companies are ideally suited to take illicit advantage of the massive amount of data that they collect and obtain. So the question is, how does this humongous potential for that sort of violation, how has it been ignored for such a long time in favor of tech companies?
I'm not sure that, I mean, the insurance industry, I was only in it from 2011 on. And before that, I don't have firsthand experience in the industry from before 2011. It is fairly common knowledge that there's a lot of fraud that goes on in these types of industries. Usually it's, individual agents get called out on some shenanigan, and often it is some sort of data mishandling, misuse, or negligence of other kinds. We're starting to see these larger cases, um, and it's probably that they're just being disclosed for the first time.
So basically, what you're saying is that the industry already ripe for abuse, but under the radar for very, on larger issues other than some individual cases, this is the next big thing, waiting to blow up, complete with the controversy over potential regulatory landscape and what should be done and who should be regulating and to what extent the industry should be allowed to self-regulate in light of all these things. But for those of us not as familiar with the insurance landscape as we are, for instance, with cyber or technology landscape, what is the framework for regulation? What is the balance between self-regulation, congressional oversight, administrative oversight? Who is really in
Well,
charge?
what needs to change?
Who is really in charge?
Who's really in charge? That's a good question. State insurance regulators manage the industries, and they're toothless tigers. There's not a lot they can do. The Oregon Insurance Commission, for example, they do not have investigative powers. They can take complaints, they can look at the complaint, they ask for a response from the broker, and that's it. It was elaborated to me nearly verbatim that they have no investigative powers. The only people with investigative powers on this is the FBI, and
Mm-hmm.
that's a busy organization. They've got a lot to do. And, when these cases get big enough that comes across their radar, they can't deal with all of this. And because it's such a cellular organization with, 1099, downlines, uplines, independent agents, it's chaos. You know, the a norm in the industry, as it was explained to me by one of the old guys that I worked with at the old company, is that the insurance industry relies on the states to do the background checks for insurance licensing, and it is not a norm for brokerages to do their own. And that hasn't changed. It should not be the case, as I've learned the hard way. But it is what it is, and it's a failure of the states to give their insurance regulators the powers to do anything. The federal government has taken steps with the Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2020 by applying the Bank Secrecy Act to the insurance industry. So steps have been taken. But even FinCEN, they don't have an investigative component. They take the complaint, send it on to the Fusion Center, and it goes from there. And again, it goes to the FBI to deal with that. And they need help. They either need more people and more budget to deal with this, or FinCEN needs a team of investigators, or the states need to start doing a better job. And I think that's a very reasonable expectation, is that the states need to start doing more to protect consumers in their state.
So essentially, you have a situation where lax regulation, lack of investigative powers, and simple bureaucracy create this toxic mix, and the people suffer as a result.
Pretty much. I mean, it's a toxic mix of mostly ineffective agencies, and the one agency that could do something, they've got other things to worry about.
Sure.
I wish they do more, but I get it. That and I'm sure they are, so I don't want to overly criticize. But more needs to be done. Part of
So
it also is the culture, though, that the exact same people that were coming out against the Affordable Care Act are the ones who are tasked with maintaining its integrity. And so
hmm,
there's a certain bit of, let's prove ourselves right and make this fail. And I think there's a bit of, and that's created a subculture of fraud.
yeah, that certainly makes sense. And of course, you probably have multiple networks benefiting from fraud in various ways, as you've just described. Which takes me back to your story. So you discovered this PPP loan that you did not approve taking out in your name. You start looking into this thing, discover other things. At what point do you decide to go to the police? What was the final straw that made you decide that this is not something that can be dealt with internally?
I went to the police on multiple occasions.
Mhm.
Somewhere after I found the PPP loan, well after I discovered, in fact, this was a year after I discovered the PPP loan, when it came to my attention that when I began seeing agents brag about making absurd amounts of money with Globe Life, as well as the multiple PPP loans taken out with the other LLCs, not the one taken out in my name. That was something I brought up directly to my business partner. I didn't involve law enforcement after that. I didn't realize it was malicious. It was when I saw the photograph of a business meeting and identified that all those individuals had taken PPP loans out and then shut down the LLCs. I contacted both the Department of Insurance, who had said, get more information. And then I contacted the Beaverton District Attorney's Office, who told me the same thing, get more information. And then when I did, they came after me. They told me that I was no longer an owner of my business, and they charged me with burglarizing the company that I was still an owner of and was the founder of. It was absolutely disturbing. And that's about when I had a nervous breakdown. I didn't know how to handle that. At that point, my income had been cut off for well over a year. I was treading water, trying to start my own thing again, but I couldn't focus on that. I was too deep in trying to figure out what had happened. So I was putting my time into that, and at the same time, every effort was stymied. That it was surreal. And I think the intention was to make it impossible for me to share this story by any means necessary.
That's really unbelievable. I mean, it seems to me like all these people were in on it to some extent. It makes no sense why anyone would be charging you with anything for moving forward with your own company and providing clear evidence uh of malfeasance.
I could barely believe it myself. That it was a maddening experience.
At what
And
At what point did your company, you mentioned that by that point you were already cut off from your income for over a year. At what point did it happen? What brought it on exactly? Who did you confront that led to your being forced out?
after I discovered the PPP loan taken out in my name,
Hmm.
things were already. I was already in a process with my former business partner that he was trying to keep me out of the office by any means necessary. And at that
What?
point, what's that?
Like what? What was he doing to keep you out?
Well, what was he doing to keep me out?
Yes.
I'd come into the office. I'd come in for a couple days, and within a few days, we'd have a conflict. He'd tell me he'd want to punch me in the face or beat my face in. I have a traumatic brain injury as well as high functioning autism, which I've made it to age 40 without having to acknowledge
Hmm.
and getting through just fine. But I don't handle stuff like that well. So I'd stay out of the office for a couple of weeks after that. And every time it happened, first I'm out for a week or so, then it'd be 3 weeks before I'd want to come back, and then four till I'd try again, and so on until finally it was worn out like a pencil. Yeah, and the guy convinced me to sign something that allowed him to take the majority share, at which point he just cut me off, took advantage of me, and dropped me like a rock.
So when you mean that he forced you to sign something, was it something you feel was you were unduly pressured into doing? Were you fully aware of the conditions and that was he threatening you in any or manipulating you in any way?
Yes, he was threatening and manipulating me, and it was 5 years of gaslighting and manipulation. I mean, by the time it occurred, everything
Oh, you cut out.
an intricate gaslighting process
Mm-hmm.
that between sabotaging my work, taking over certain responsibilities, then blaming me for handing them over. It was quite advanced. It was dark psychology at its finest.
Did you at any point get legal assistance to deal with this guy?
I sort of. I had a company attorney that I've known for a long time, and he had to sit down with both of us a few years prior. Um, when the conflict occurred, I began using my girlfriend's father, who is a renowned attorney who's been before the Supreme Court. And it was weird. He was quite toothless and he sent an email to Chris's lawyer, get a response back. A few weeks later to a month, he'd reply. And it was just extremely ineffective.
Hmm.
And finally, and this was a few months before I really started just investigating this myself and stumbled upon the multiple PPP loans, etc. the last thing the guy said to me was, I guess you're out of luck, and I wouldn't bother contacting another attorney. He gave me
What?
recommendations to not seek additional legal advice.
What?
And yeah, so that slowed me down for a little while. It motivated my DIY efforts, but it definitely slowed me down on, finding other legal assistance. And I'm not exactly sure why that occurred. Maybe he just wanted his daughter to move back home. He wasn't licensed in the state of Oregon, which didn't
Mhm.
help. But at the same time, his former company shows up in the Panama Papers leaks, as I discovered later. And I think he was blackmailed. I think that he got
Sounds,
threatened.
it
Yeah,
sounds like he was compromised in some way, because
I think so.
it seems like he was slow rolling the investigation, and they felt because you have that personal relationship, it would be easier to kind of handle than if you had hired a real lawyer with an, signed retainer and so forth.
Correct. I think that's exactly what happened. It hasn't been confirmed. It's obviously a sensitive topic, but I can't find any other explanation for why things happened that way, why I got that parting advice, why things took so long, and why this guy is so effective in every other case he's ever been in, but was so ineffective on this.
Hmm. Well, the worst part of it is that he told you not to seek any lawyer's assistance. I mean, is he usually someone with a big ego who is concerned about his image, or was it more, something more sinister that's, that he was basically trying to prevent you from actually making progress? And
I I suspect so. That may be one that I never will know for certain, but it sure looks that way.
mhm. So, all right, so your legal, assistance has proved to be tremendously ineffective and in some ways a setback. At this point, you're forced out of the company under completely, illicit pretense. You don't feel like you have a recourse. Did you try suing your partner afterwards, after you were already out?
No, I was out of money and nobody was interested in helping me.
Mm. So finally, you return to the police. They start charging you with things. And
Mhm.
how did you handle that from a legal perspective? Obviously, emotionally, you're distraught, confused, overwhelmed, but you still need to deal with the legal issue. So what happens?
Not well is the most summarized version. I wound up with a public defender who looked me in the eye and told me it did not matter that I was an owner of the company.
Hmm.
And I don't completely understand that, um, but that's what he said. And then started going for a mental health defense.
What?
Yeah, it basically tried to say I'm crazy. I can't tell if that was malicious or incompetent. It's the same kind of thing. But that's what happened then. He recommended I stop looking into this. Did acknowledge that there seemed to be more to this that than was let on. That was the most I ever got out of him. In acknowledgement that that I was correct, is that he did believe that there was more to this than was being let on. But he decided to go with mental health defense, and they were ready to throw me in the hospital.
Wow. So what happened as a result? How did the case end?
It didn't. I ran away. It hasn't ended. That after a few months later, when I made a few more very shocking discoveries, um, I made some frantic calls to the FBI to report them. And within 72 hours, I was in a situation where I had guns pointed at me, and more. That's described in chapter 5 of my book. Um, it, it, from my perspective, it felt like the police in Bend, Oregon had tried to kill me. And, perhaps it was a giant misunderstanding. Perhaps it was malicious, and probably a combination of both. I don't know. This is something that would, unless a lawsuit's filed and discovery occurs, then, there's no way to really get to the bottom of it. But that's about when I decided that my life was in danger.
So wait a second. At some point, you escaped the state because you realized that you're not getting effective assistance of counsel, and you're likely to end up in a psych ward,
Hmm.
in the best case scenario, or in jail, you know,
Yeah.
depending how. So you call the FBI because you think the feds can do something. How do you end up in a, with guns pointed at you? I mean, how did they come to believe that you present a direct and imminent threat to the special agents?
Well, so here's what happened, and this is where the story starts getting a little crazy. Um, my father is retired Army Corps of Engineers, and Christopher Wang had made a comment to me about a year or so before the parting of ways that he had been to my father's house. And I had thought he was just trying to get under my skin at the time, but as I began discovering the sophistication of these frauds and pondering what that meant, and noticed a wedding registration between one of his star employees and accomplices that was registered at the Orthodox Church, which is a hot, there's plenty of articles and news to support organized crime being connected there.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of them, but it's a subculture. I began to become very concerned that I was dealing with something that was backed by a nation state. And I began thinking of, why would this guy be at my father's house? Could it have something to do with his work history at the Corps of Engineers? And then I recalled that he had cut off contact, that Christopher Wang had cut off all contact with me the week that my grandmother had passed away. My grandfather was one of the principal designers of Willamette Valley Dam projects. He had a basement full of junk that, I don't know why, I don't know what the rules were at this time, but
Mm-hmm.
he had copies of some of his old work. In fact, I think he had the originals of some of his old work that probably had been discarded when the Corps of Engineers began to digitize their blueprints for dams. And, as I was coming to this conclusion, this was sophisticated fraud, operating within some sort of organized criminal network, began to consider the potentiality of nation state involvement. And it's not just the demographic here, although the name Wang sure pops up in a lot of these types of frauds. I began to get very worried that this person had attempted to gain access to that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I start picking up the phone, and I'm sure I sounded like a nut when I was making these calls.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to tell if this was if there was a misunderstanding or malicious. I don't know. Either way, I wound up being surveilled and panicked. And I got on a bus, absolutely convinced that, my sloppy and loud investigation
Mm-hmm.
was frankly about to trigger whatever, evil plans were going to occur, if they were.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to Bend, and then I went into a bar and started talking about this. And next thing you know, I'm getting followed around. And, I get chased into a vacant house and spent the night in that vacant house. Go for a walk the next day, and it was validated that I had been getting chased around. I encountered the Bend police in the park. I didn't realize they were the police at the time, but I was a
Mm-hmm.
7 foot tall, dressed in a militia jacket and a long beard, a militia style hat and sunglasses, walking behind a guy with a shaved head and a black trench coat, just dressed to the stereotype of, you
Mm-hmm.
know, Eastern criminal. followed by a blonde woman in a hat who I couldn't tell what the hat was from a distance. When I got closer, it was the police. I see these guys in the park, and I'm just thinking to myself, okay, I'm either losing it, there's a live action role playing game that I'm not aware of, or this is something else. So I make a rapid gesture to my back pocket, which was not
Mm.
not the most intelligent thing perhaps, but it indicated they were paying attention to me. They all jumped and then kind of cowered. And at that point, I marched up right to them. I was about to have some words and I finally noticed the Bend police had instead of getting in their face, I just kind of, growled at them and walked by. Um, and then I walked to a bench and near my old neighborhood in Bend, where I'd lived a year and a half before, and sat down. And I began noticing the same vehicles circling the block I was on, paying unusual attention to me. And at this point, I'm just losing my mind. I'm carrying a heavy load of awareness, I guess is the way to describe it. Now I've got this going on. So I'm just sitting there with my head in my hands on the verge of tears, thinking that, the world has gone mad around me. Um, and frankly thinking I'm about to die. And then I finally go sit back in the park and, I just think these are my final moments and I'm going to give in and just let them shoot me. So I sit down, I'm looking at the river, and then two other people come up to me. These two I recognized. One of them was a regular attendee in the neighborhood park near my old house. They just always seemed to be there when I was there. Never had interacted with them before, but he was very familiar. And the other one was the spitting image of a former employer, obviously his son. And these two come down and sit next to me. And this bench was at a table. They reach under the table and pantomime grabbing something out, and it appears to be a container that contains microfilm. And I look at them both. They're starting to talk, and I just got up and walked away.
What did they
Went,
want?
what's that?
What did they want?
I don't know. Maybe they were just testing me.
Mhm.
Yeah, they probably were. I don't know why they didn't just, come and talk to me like normal people. Or maybe they were trying to set me up and, get me on camera. I probably all of the above. Although I had a good relationship with that former employer, and it was obviously his son. I have a hard time believing that was malicious. That's the son of a friend. Maybe in their own way, they were just trying to come and without telling me as per whatever instructions they had received. So I think at this point, this was no longer just the police. This was something to do with the Oregon National Guard, who were activated for COVID duty and all in Bend at this time.
Mhm.
That, in fact, it was kind of funny. Within 24 hours of me making these calls, the governor had activated the guard. And it's COVID. It could be a
Right.
coincidence, but it was sure timed. It was noticeably timed. I also noticed that Senator Wyden made a statement about illegal surveillance 24 hours after this all occurred. So, maybe that was a coincidence, but I don't think so. I think that was front and center. And I think Senator Wyden was trying to do the right thing.
So,
And it's,
how sure were you that those people who were following you around were the police and National Guard and not some private outfit?
I don't. I mean, other than the police hat that the one person was wearing. And I encountered her again when I went back to the Bend Police Department to pick up my property after being
Mhm.
released. So she was a police officer. So they definitely, the Bend Police were definitely involved in this. What they failed to do is, come get me after this was all over and say, hey, go home. That, you know, or hey, we're taking you to the doctor. Do you need some help? Instead, they left me there for another day and a half. And then they sent a SWAT team in after me.
What? What
Yeah, and
really?
it gets worse. That's only the beginning of the story. So
Mm-hmm.
then, so I'm there in this house pulling my hair out, practically talking to myself.
Yeah.
That, I'm just losing it. A neighbor notices me, calls the police. Two arrive, and one seemed to be a mature, well-adjusted individual, and the other one, while the other guy and I are talking, this guy whips his gun out and starts waving it around. Just
What?
all of a sudden, yeah, and he starts hopping back and forth, doing this, and it's just disturbing, So I duck. This guy looked like he was going half nuts. Um, and in my opinion, he behaved that way because he knew I was there. And they chased me into this house. They messed with me for 3 days, and then they tried to kill me. That
Well, what were they
or put me
at
in.
one point, at any point, did they question you? Did they try to engage? Did they say, why, what was going on? Was there any conversation going on? Because it seems to me very odd. They were chasing you around, but you're not being charged with anything. What exactly was the issue? This is what I don't understand.
At best, it would have been a miscommunication based on my phone calls expressing my concerns. And, that definitely was bringing some concerning things up. Hey, there's a fraud network that seems to have attempted to access Corps of Engineers property, including, copies of blueprints of dams. You know, yeah, I had to write a 300-word book about this to, really explain the story. So compressed into a 30-second phone call, it probably does sound bonkers. That,
Okay, but even if they thought that you were mentally unstable and making everything up or misinterpreting events, none of this sounds like anything remotely following the protocol that law enforcement would follow in such an instance.
I
In,
would agree
I
that,
mean, let's
I'm
say
not.
they think you are dangerous. Why would they want to aggravate you and potentially cause a public incident and get people injured?
Well, and this is where I question the intent of the matter. I mean, this is kind of why I say, eh, and I'm willing to consider all information. I'm willing to consider, any aspect of it. But when it's all said and done, the conduct that they conducted sure implies that their intent was to shut me up by any means necessary, whether that was, driving me nuts and taking me away or getting me killed. That and you know, I that's for others to decide exactly. But I appreciate you saying that. That I think you're probably right. That that's not standard operating procedure. That's and for whatever intent, they did not follow it. They it was malfeasance at best. And this is why I left in a panic because that they were behaving more like a criminal organization than trusted officials. And at that point, I didn't know who to trust. This was all too bonkers for me. It took me 2 years to be able to express this. It took me a year to wrap my mind around it and a year to express it.
So this guy, is waving his gun around. You don't know what they want. They're not. Are they speaking? Saying? Are they articulating anything? Are they asking?
No, yeah, it's the the other officer and I had a brief exchange,
Mm-hmm.
and I did my best to describe what had happened.
Mm-hmm.
And in the middle of doing so, the guns came out, and that's when communication ended. And not
That's
guns, gun. The other guy started waving his gun around. I think his partner was surprised that I truly do. I think
That's
one of them had foreknowledge and the other one didn't, and I don't know why that is. Either it's evidence of criminal intent or
mhm.
something.
So there's this bizarre incident going on. You're afraid that at the very least there could be an accident or that they could deliberately shoot you, whatever the case may be. What do you do next? What happens?
Well, I went and hid in the attic for 6 hours.
Did they
And
pursue you? Did they try to get in after you?
nah, they couldn't find the attic. That
What?
there was right. That it
It sounds
was.
like a gang that couldn't shoot straight.
No, they literally asked me, "How did you get in here?" No, they had. I think they used a saw and cut their way in. That they couldn't find the access port. That yeah, I had an extra day there, but
Right.
one more time. But they no, it was laughable from beginning to end.
This is
Um,
this is
I
just
mean, it was honestly kind of funny, when the SWAT guy gets in there and and he brought a dog with him and goes, and I was hiding in the insulation at this point. I guess I played a lot of video games. Yeah, so I'm hiding in the insulation. The guy goes, hey, the dog can smell you. My exact words to him were, "Are you American?"
because at this point you're probably not sure what the hell is going on and whether those people are even, who they claim appear to be or not, right?
You got it. At this point, I've been so buried in my own problems for 6 months. Plus, it was
Sure.
COVID. At this point, I'm scratching my head, going, "Did I miss something?" Yeah. Did I miss the memo?
This is like a comic movie scene, a
Did the
comedian.
Russians take over? It's literally, yeah, I was in that point of a panic, and this was so surreal that, I was actually wondering if something like that was going on. So this guy responds back, "Yes." He sounds slightly confused, and yeah, okay, I'm coming out. That, and then he goes, I think he's all right. That guy was, I got no personal problem with him. That, he announces to everybody else, "Hey, this guy, we're coming out peacefully, amicably, and everything's okay, be cool." And so we do, then his dog lays down right next to me, to the shock of every other officer. They kind of start yelling at the dog as he's treating me like a victim. That that dog was the best officer there that day. Good dog. That and then the erratic guy was waving the gunner around. He yanks me into his car and starts demanding, "Why were you in that house?" Blah blah. And, which is funny because I think he sure as hell knew why I was in that house.
Mhm.
That and I wasn't interested in talking to him. That so I didn't. And then the other guy, who frankly seemed to be surprised about the whole thing, he took me to jail. They wouldn't take me because my blood pressure was too elevated. So I wound up at the,
Were they charging you with trespassing? Why were they taking you to jail?
they were charging me, they charged me with burglary of the house.
Hmm.
That, trespassing is what it was. It's a vacant for sale house. There's no burglary involved. That's
Right.
just
You're
silly.
obviously not there to commit any crimes or to steal anything, so just
Correct.
right. Hmm.
That's theft of services. And then I get another public defender, and this guy, oh, I don't know if he's a good lawyer or not. He's in private practice now, but he didn't believe me that any of this happened. That he just thought it was ridiculous. The same thing with the mental health defense, and I couldn't tell you if I couldn't tell you if that was malicious or same thing. It just all seemed unbelievable until I was able to write a book about it.
Well, let's look at it from the lawyer's perspective. They're probably like low-level guys who deal with run-of-the-mill crimes, small things, and first of all, you come up with this complex thing about insurance fraud and whistleblower retaliation and potential organized crime links, and it's probably well above their heads, and not anything they normally deal with at all.
I'm sure of that. He has my sympathy for that reason. The other one is these guys, Oregon is, I mean, all public defender services are overworked. Oregon in particular, to the point that the Department of Justice has got involved in the past year. They began to require, they can't get people attorneys. They literally have people, going to court unrepresented. Um, so I think Oregon it's an even worse issue there than anywhere else for whatever reason.
All right, so they bring you to jail. They can't take you in because at this point you're a nervous wreck. Your blood pressure is, elevated. What happens?
Well, at the hospital for a little while. Then they take me to jail and put me in, isolation. This is typically the medical wing. So, probably the right move. Had any of this been the right move, but it was the medical wing. And then I go before the court and they, let me out and send me on my way.
Sure.
That I scraped together $50 and caught a bus ticket back to Salem where I was living, which was a home that had been converted into an office, and is where I was, attempting to either rebuild another business and
Mhm.
mostly just conducting this investigation.
So then, meanwhile, you're looking at all these things, you're looking at all these frauds. Did you notice any patterns that were unusual that would indicate beyond, Christopher Wang's, comments and, potential interest in your father's dam plans, blueprints, but was there anything indicating that there could be an organized crime or foreign connection within the actual pattern of the frauds themselves?
Christopher Wang had brought on a guy. Our first employee at the company was someone that he had personally vouched for, who was going by the name of Mark Meadows. Which it's not unusual for people to share names with well-known figures.
Sure, yeah, obviously, because,
It can happen. It is a bit of a coincidence for someone to be involved in identity theft and also have a name like that. In fact, it seems to be a common pattern that you can't find these people online. When I started looking into that guy, I started noticing his vehicles are registered under different names. The prior company he had worked for, that this Mark Meadows character had been with, called Priority One Insurance, I think. They were a competitor also doing search engine optimization. They were trying to show up on Google. And so they were a competing website. And at one point, I had Googled their phone number and noticed it shows up on a Microsoft.com page. Their phone numbers identified in remote IT phone scams. And so I confronted Mark Meadows about this. He acknowledged that the website acknowledged that the phone number did show up, claimed that they had already begun a significant marketing campaign with that phone number, which, from a SEO guy's perspective, once you start marketing a website and phone number, it's important to be consistent for local SEO. So that, was not unreasonable. And this company still was in business with the license. The state had taken no action against them. And what really mattered is that Mark claimed that he was no longer involved with that company, that the other partner was operating this. That other partner's name is Grant Harris. And that individual, I didn't think about at the time, but as I began to learn more about what synthetic identity theft is and how that works, well, I couldn't help but notice that Grant Street and Harris Street those are streets in Portland. So this guy, maybe he exists, maybe not, I don't know. But he's got a mashup of street names for a name. Um, doesn't seem to have much of an online presence, and other than this business, which has a phone number showing up on Microsoft's page of remote IT phone scam numbers. So it later became very suspicious as I began to see the scope of all of this. That was one of them. The connection to the Orthodox Church was that indicated there was something else going on. Um, Chris Wang did tell me, when he was bragging one day, he claimed that his grandfather was some sort of a Chinese organized crime figure with restaurants in Southern Oregon, which, I didn't take that too seriously at the time. Most of us around here have, some ancestor who did something during Prohibition. Hell, the
Right.
Kennedys did. They made him president. So I just didn't take it that seriously at the time. But as I began to put all this together and think to myself, wow, this guy sure is acting like an organized criminal. Wow, his last name is Wang, and he bragged about his grandfather doing things like that. That's when I really began to think this is organized.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Chris Wang's father was a programmer for HP. So as I put all this together, I began to think about that, and I began to wonder, is that did this skip a generation? That didn't seem likely. So I
Mm-hmm.
did a search online, and I couldn't help but notice that the Army Corps of Engineers suffered a breach in 2013 of their dam blueprint repository, which is
Really?
certainly certainly connected to a printing system, and who else would make it? I'll bet, you know, I would bet money that that was HP government. I don't know, and there's no way to know, but somebody else does. But it sure would make a lot of sense that I began to wonder if there was something there. And who knows, that might be reaching, but it would also be strange if this skipped a generation.
Right. Well, you know, you know, now that you mentioned this breach, and then the fact that your father was there and had all that stuff, and that Christopher went to his house, that doesn't seem to be all that coincidental. I mean, it's just,
It's
but
too many coincidences.
what was that breach? Let's go back to 2013. Was that ever investigated? Did they figure out what happened or who was behind it, or was it, you know?
The only articles online say that it was attributed to Chinese nation state hackers. Other than that, I have no idea. Yeah, that's the
Right.
FBI's business.
Uh-huh. And so what happened? Did they institute any sort of, reforms about the dams? Did they provide any additional security after that happened?
Beats me. I mean, that's something that I'm sure they did. It'd be weird if they didn't. I hope
Right.
so. I
Well,
would assume
the way you're
so.
telling me about the police and the some of these VF people, at this point, who knows?
Correct. And that's kind of how I felt about it for a long time. My faith in the federal government, is it took a while to get it back, but you know what? Nobody's been bothering me.
Sure.
I know I've been checked up on,
Mm-hmm.
but nobody's mistreated me.
Right.
Yeah, nobody's taken me back to Oregon.
Right.
Yeah,
Mhm.
you know, so yeah, and I've gone out of my way to network with people with the FBI on LinkedIn, and it's refreshing. It just reminds me that the good guys are the good guys.
Sure.
This is a subculture, and I'm sure they've got their problems and they deal with it. Yeah, I think Oregon's subculture is probably larger than other states, but who knows? That's different. Um, I don't know. I mean, there were a lot of, it took a long time to really get my faith in humanity back.
I can
That's,
imagine. I mean, good thing at least you managed. Many other people in your situation probably wouldn't. But let's go back. You get out. You manage to grab the bus, get the heck out of there, get to your residence, your office. What happens then after this bizarre series of incidents? What's your next step? What's your next move?
well, at that point, I think I'd done most of the investigating that needed to be done. At that point, it was kind of just processing all of this.
Hmm.
I danced the dance with the courts for a couple of months, and then what really was the last straw is when I posted something on Facebook about my problems, and then I get a call from the police saying that a restraining order has been taken out against me, and I'm not allowed to talk about my problems,
By
and that
whom?
Christopher Wang.
I see.
Yeah, so Christopher Wang had taken out a restraining order. That I didn't travel to contest it. I didn't have the means to do so at that point. I was broke. That I didn't even go. That maybe that could have been dealt with if I had. That there's things I could have done better. I'm aware of that.
Hmm.
That but the deck was stacked against me. That
Hey, listen, when a regular person ends up in a bizarre, set of circumstances like this, I think it's easy to judge from the outside what you could or should have done. But, it's
sure.
overwhelming, it's confusing, understandably difficult. So, at what point did the stuff finally start coming out? What precipitated finally, some of this actually being taken seriously, and by whom?
I think the FBI always took this seriously.
Hmm.
I had contacted the Portland field office, and a friend of a friend gave me an email of a personal
Hmm.
contact over there. You know, I'm sure I over emailed them, and I was not at my best communicating at that point. So some of these emails are just, I look back on it and go, I can't believe I wrote that badly. And I definitely have some sympathy that for potential misunderstandings.
Sure.
That of course, it should have been handled better, and of course, the authorities should have just come out and talked to me. That, but at the same time, some of these emails, and they're frantic and desperate, and and full of misspellings. That it was terrible. That and I've probably sent a solid 30 or 40 of them, which is
Right.
not the normal way to do things. But when you're in a panic and have high functioning autism and a TBI, it's easy to get a little agitated. And that I would say I was in a constant state of agitation at that point, and reasonably so. That so that's how that works. I think I think the FBI has been on top of it. I hope so. I don't know, and I probably shouldn't overcome it there, especially if I ever want to see anything done about this. But
Mhm.
but considering that the news has published that that Globe Life was involved in these frauds and all of these they're certainly looking at Globe Life's internal documents, which are going to contain the agent names at this point. Why bother? Not talk. Why not talk about it? It's time to come forward. And I want my reputation back and my
Sure.
dignity. I've been stripped of that. That you know I I cannot help but notice that if 'cause I bounce around from short-term rental, like like someone's broke. you know, I can't help but notice that if I pick one that's too close to an industrial area, I start getting phone calls from former Airbnb residents who are highly inquisitive about my internet search history and things like that.
Hmm.
That none of whom have mistreated me, but I want to be trusted. I
Sure.
want my reputation back. And and from my perspective, I can't imagine what else I could have possibly done to to demonstrate my integrity other than not have high functioning autism and a TBI. You know, other than have been completely cool through the whole process, I guess, or I've just gone away. I don't know. That that's a confounding question of what else I could have done. And but I just want my reputation back.
Sure.
Tired of being treated this way, and I've done nothing wrong. Frankly, I've gone above and beyond trying to do the right thing. Maybe too much. I don't know. Probably. But so that's why I wrote this, and that's why I'm here.
So at what point, how did the article started coming out? Who picked up on this and how?
A hedge fund took a short position in Globe Life and then announced to the world why. How they came by the information, who knows? They didn't publish that. Then Reuters picked it up, and there's a few other articles talking all about the Globe Life frauds and AIL, which is their sales organization. And once I saw that, I go, what am I? Why am I sitting on this? Why am I
Sure.
pretending this didn't happen? It's time to be heard. So I suddenly started telling the world who I am and what happened to me. And feverishly wrote down what happened, which, I hardly had to look at my notes. It's just, I have a nearly photographic memory.
Hmm.
So, once it started going, it didn't take long to write. And then once my section of the story ends and kind of phases out, I go, I've got the beginning of a thriller here. So I just went with it and started speculating on why and looking at some other characters that, in real life to inspire some characters that were probably involved here that made it a good old fashioned American novel.
So I'll get to that momentarily, but first,
Okay.
the main question that I have: what happened to Christopher Wang at the end of the day and his gang of, miscreants?
Far as I know, he's still in business doing evil
Wow,
deeds. Uh-huh.
that's
Yeah,
unbelievable.
yeah, it is. It's disturbing. My my poor former clients that if not for the restraining order, I sent out an email to all of them. Probably should anyway.
So
That
for, so for now, what we're missing is good old-fashioned closure with
justice.
with Wang and his, whoever supports him being uncovered and so forth. Maybe there's going to be a part two to all of this, a sequel. But let's get back to the original. One of the essays you posted or online involves a politician who's had a history with some sort of a cult and then appears to be someone else, basically double talking while being enmeshed in some sort of a extreme right-wing agenda. Could you tell me a little bit more about that, how that ties into the story, and where did these ideas come from? Was there any sort of a character you've encountered in real life or some sort of organization that was, linked to all of this in any way?
Sure. So, I started taking that direction in the book and in my speculations about, what all this was all about, based on, Chris's politics, which are very far right, rah rah Trump, repeal the Affordable Care Act by any means necessary, which is one of the suspicions of why these frauds are occurring is to undermine the Affordable Care Act and take advantage of that. And getting back to that whole these guys were against the Affordable Care Act and they're bound and determined to prove they were right. Um,
Well, if these people were
Marx
speaking,
politics the same way that ties to Eastern Oregon, things like that. frankly, I was able to identify running a search on InfoTracer that, that they have ties to addresses in Eastern Oregon, things like
Do you have attached to what? Sorry, I missed that.
ties to Eastern Oregon, specifically Prineville, which is where the Oregon National Guard is headquartered.
Sure.
So that's kind of where I began to speculate that there's a nexus of a subculture that's involved with some of these far-right militias, which, there's plenty of news articles talking about Oregon police and military that are involved in these, and it's a subculture. It's not all of them. That, it's not my purpose here to denigrate the Oregon National Guard. That I think they're probably working their butts off to take care of this, so I hope that but it's an ongoing issue. And the politics of Oregon, you've got there's an Eastern Oregon culture that really wants to secede from Oregon and get into Idaho.
Yes, I've
Um,
heard about some of that.
yes, and these militia movements that are based out of Oregon, based out of Idaho and Oregon. Um,
Well, there's been some stories about Russian groups exploiting these secessionist kind of movements to just destabilization. And if there are nation state actors involved in something like that, their purpose might be far beyond the ACA. In fact, it might be
correct.
more general political destabilization than any particular legislative effort that.
Absolutely, and I think that's something where these organized criminals that belong to those these Russian organized criminals that get tied into. So getting back to the connection I found to the Orthodox Church, Chris had also informed me that his most recent hires were extremely religious, and that he had gone through a similar religious conversion, about a year before I was getting forced out. It's just kind of following that train of logic. I'm,
Religious conversion to Orthodoxy or to
I'm
just
not positive about that, but I'm going to assume so. That because the employees that he was talking about is extremely religious. That that I found evidence that this was a. I try to avoid using this word, but it is a legal term, conspiracy. That a conspiracy to embezzle and transfer assets.
sure, absolutely.
Um,
That's.
I found handwritten notes that discussed that it was him, Mark, Gabe, and Everett. That Gabe and Everett. Gabe was married at the Orthodox Church in Beaverton, Oregon. I cannot help but notice that the leader of the Orthodox Church in Bend, Oregon, which is the closest city to the Oregon National Guard headquarters, guess what? He's a programmer for health insurance companies, and he's involved in managing their back end electronic systems. It's on LinkedIn. That his name's Damian Keel. You can look this up. That it really didn't take long to write that part of the novel. That 'cause honestly, that wasn't the focus of my investigation. That I
Sure.
only looked at that for the purposes of writing the book. It took about 10 minutes
Mm-hmm.
to profile that guy as a former U.S. Air Force officer who had converted to become a priest in the Orthodox Church, sets up shop right by the Oregon National Guard headquarters, ties to the Orthodox Church right by the Air Force Academy. The thing practically wrote itself. That it just
It's just
it's so
unbelievable.
obvious.
I
Yeah,
mean,
it's unbelievable. And of course,
well,
these guys are tied to the latest wing of right wing congressmen.
for
You got
goodness sake.
Congressman Clark Brandt. That and this guy grew up in the Dalles. He was 27 years old when the 1984 event with the Raj cult occurred. I'm sure that shaped him, and reasonably so. That um, because
So
he was
wait,
there, and that was a horrific incident.
I
The
don't know.
labyrinth.
Can you tell the audience a little bit about the cult and that incident? Because I don't think most people would be necessarily
Sure.
familiar with that.
Time ago, I was very young that when this occurred. I don't remember it myself. There was a cult, though, that set up shop in the Dalles, Oregon. And it was, uh, I'm not sure exactly what their faith was, but it was something southeastern.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they they poisoned a salad bar with, I think, salmonella. They intentionally, the news reports at the time used the word bioterror attack. And it was the one and only, to my knowledge, bioterror attack to ever occur in the United States. And it was in Oregon, and it was culturally shaping. And of course it was. Nothing wrong with people, caring about that. And yeah, sure it was traumatizing, especially for the people who lived in that town. But it is noticeable that the guy who is now the congressman representing the district where most of these far right militias exist has been newly elected and replacing the former guy who he was right, but he wasn't far right.
Sure.
Uh, was shaped by those events. That probably makes it very easy for him to pursue policies and support groups that are violently xenophobic.
Mm-hmm. Well, this whole situation is just absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, and that's where it starts. We're moving into speculative fiction at that point in the
Sure.
book, but it's all based on stuff Willamette Week has reported and is verifiable online, and it's quite logical when you look at the connections between the health insurance industry and the Orthodox Church in Bend, and their proximity to the Oregon National Guard, and the new congressman representing the second district in Oregon. It sure looks like an ecology.
Well, I mean, there are so many angles now to follow up on to investigate. I hope you don't drop it, just because that part of the story is over. There seems to be a lot more that you can dig into and explore. And now that, with lessons learned from past experiences, maybe meet with journalists, investigative journalists, and present this information in kind of a more systematic way that can help actually get to the bottom of this craziness. And
Sure.
because at the end of the day, conspiracies and others clear evidence of multiple frauds, embezzlements, bribery, kickbacks to law enforcement and assorted officials, possible blackmail of lawyers and things like that. Lots and lots of organized crime activity that, even without any foreign and national security implications, is in itself completely damaging and disasters, and probably affecting even more than what you were able to discover. It seems to me like it has quite a broad reach and has people who've been moving across the industry from company to company and probably growing their networks and ensnaring more and more people as the longer they
Certainly.
do it.
Yeah, and I'm sure I'm only seeing not the tip of the iceberg, but just the part that's visible to me. That this certainly goes further than my visibility, or frankly, where as far as I've investigated it. That and I'm just a one-man show. That I'm not the FBI. That but I think I got a feeling of what their days are like. It's I imagine there's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot to wrap our minds around. Um, and the thread goes, there's a million different threads here to pull on. That I pulled on one, and look what came tumbling out. And it only opens up more threads to pull on. That and you know, but I can't imagine this isn't going to be dealt with, and I'm sure it is. That's because this is a huge problem. This is a huge problem for the state of Oregon. It's a problem for the nation. It's a problem for individuals, and I, I would have a hard time imagining that there, other than emergencies, that this isn't a very high priority. And it's probably going on in other states. In fact, it certainly is. And it's yeah, I'm sure it's a big case.
It is, and I hope this at some point comes to light. I think people like Wang are held accountable, and all the connections and all the crimes are finally see the light of days, because it seems to me that a lot of people should be going down for that. I mean, We've heard of the FTX case. We've heard of various crypto industry being exploited, tech industry being exploited, but now we have insurance company, and it seems to be ripe for,
Yeah.
you
Well, and
know.
we're seeing this in the news. United Healthcare is being breached. J.P. Morgan's being breached.
Mhm.
And what's funny is if you look up these companies, they're all in the Panama Papers. With offshore investors. There's a lot of shady money out there. I've got my opinions on why that data is being leaked. But they're opinions. I'm not going to libel anyone.
Well, I'll be honest with you. Looking at some of these major companies and healthcare companies, I've always wondered they can afford the best in business in cybersecurity. Why
But
is
they
it?
forget to turn on their multi-factor authentication. I know it's a head scratcher. I'm doing it too.
Yeah,
That's you know
yeah, just who exactly are they hiring, and what are these people doing? Are they just selling, security information and exploits to whoever is
well,
to the highest bidder outside the company? So sometimes wonder about some of the people they actually hire.
hmm I think who they hire and then who they accept as investors and what the strings are that come attached with that. Who knows? I could speculate all day, and I'm jaded on the industry, so I'm going to go straight to the negative, most negative option. Yeah, um, but I haven't been wrong so far. I think. It seems like every day another article comes out that's just a little bit closer to validating everything. And I definitely got validated on the specifics and the whole core of this investigation on April 11th, which made my day to see I mean, I don't like seeing that there's frauds going on, but it is nice to know I wasn't losing my mind.
No, no, I think there's definitely a there, so to speak. I hope, this thing will come through and will get attention. I hope the story also gets out and journals start digging into some of these issues, because it really requires a far wider investigation. Looks like we've hit the tip of the iceberg here, but there's a lot more underneath. Well, thank you so much for taking all this time to talk to me today, and I hope
Absolutely.
that everyone watching will check out your book on Kindle, Shadows of Eden, that lays out this whole story and some of the other angles that are tied into that. And I hope somebody will watching this program will will realize that there is a treasure trove of information to be uncovered, and takes the time to reach out to you and to investigate.
Me too. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely.
I believe the FBI needs journalist help. I need some journalist help.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think this is a journalistic jackpot for somebody.
Well,
Like you.
let's see. Let's
I
see.
really appreciate coming on the show.
Between our contacts, hopefully something pans out. And for those watching the program, the Washington Outsider Report brings you stories and discussions, and digs into issues that are usually get very poor or negligible treatment in the mainstream media. And we are looking to basically provide in-depth coverage of issues of global and national importance that are frequently overlooked, poorly understood, or one-sided in the way they're produced. And we feature diversity of voices with different experiences, different backgrounds that provide uh, broad perspectives on these and other issues. Please tune back to us with us next Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, as usual, for our next program. Thank you again. Have a great night.